What's the recipe for writing a really great book? In this video, I want to show you what ingredients you need and how do you combine them so you don't get a soggy mess. One of the very best books that we've written was this one, The CEO's Journey. On this day, 11 years ago, Rami Makhzoomi, a former student of mine at London Business School, died suddenly and far too soon. He was the CEO of Future Pipe Industries with thousands of global employees. He was a family man with 3 young daughters, and he was just 33 years old, so young. At a loss for what to say to his father and mother, I suggested that when the time was right, that perhaps they would honour my wife Jacqueline and me with the task of writing a memoir for Rami. Almost immediately, the family agreed, and The CEO's Journey became one of our best ever books. Now, the reason that it is so good is the countless great stories in the book from the people who knew Rami best, from his family and his friends, from his colleagues, even from customers. So here's the key ingredient when it comes to writing your book. Get great stories. Stories keep people interested. They want to read on. And stories move the larger story on as well. Now, how do you get those great stories? Well, that's from interviews. So here's my biggest single tip for writing a great book. Get great interviews. But before we talk about how many interviews, let's deal with the giant cupcake in the room. Because, wait a minute, you might be thinking, I want my book to be my thoughts and my stories and my ideas. Well, that's fine if you're a great writer and a great storyteller, and if you can turn even dense statistics into a great story. So go ahead, write it from your head. And no, you don't need to do any interviews. But please, just make sure you tell great stories. So you'll need great recall of the people you met in your life and how they've interacted with you. Tell those stories. It'll enliven your book no end. Whatever you do, don't just write in abstract PowerPoint bullet points. I'll say it again, tell great stories. If you want to make your life a little easier for yourself, I urge you to interview people, in part because this becomes your primary research for the book. You're not just copying and pasting facts from blogs and other people's research. Now, that can be useful as supporting evidence for what you're talking about. That's secondary research. But your book should not be based on other people's work. What's more, your book automatically becomes more rigorous when you include your own research, your own primary research that no one else has. Your book then is not just something that you made up out of your head. It's not just a string of your opinions. It's also based on great data. The research data that comes from your interviews, the quotes that you use. Your book then is unique. So how many interviews do you need to do? Well, in our experience, you need at least 20 interviews to become the core of a good book. Why 20? Well, think about this. If you transcribe an hour-long interview, you're going to get 7,000 to 8,000 words of text. And if your interviewee talks as fast as I do, you may get nearer to 10 or even 12,000 words. So if you do 20 interviews, you will have, well, let's do the maths. 10,000 times 20, that's 200,000 words. Now, you don't want to publish all of those, but it will give you the ability to choose the best stories, the best insights, and to put them in your book. So you only need, I would say, about a third of that material, plus your overarching commentary as a backbone to the book. You see, you do get to include your opinions, but as the overarching narrative. So you're going to create a book of 50, 60, or maybe even 70,000 words, something like our 7 failings of really useless leaders. Now, finally, how do you combine your story ingredients for the best impact? Well, there are fundamentally 2 ways to combine your interview stories, vertically or horizontally. Let me explain. Leadership FM, for example, which was about leadership in the facilities management industry, was written with each chapter as an exploration of one interviewee's life. You Should Write a Book is also much the same. Each chapter is a case study based on how one of our podcast interviewees writes their books. Now, it makes sense to keep those case studies together because the writers describe their body of work and how their writing process has changed over the years. The chapters are self-contained, and that's the key. Now, we call this a vertical structure, and the book is a series of pillars. Lego never gets old. But the stories in the CEO's journey are structured horizontally across the chapters of the book. As we compared the interview transcripts, we noticed certain themes emerge, and those themes became the chapters. So we copied and pasted different stories into different themed chapters. So the chapters in this book include comments and stories from a variety of different people. And there's a beautiful overlap across the book, enhancing the overarching story, in this case about Rami Makhzoomi. A friend of ours, Matri O'Brien, is about to publish her book called The New Leaders of Change. And again, this is a horizontal book. The stories from her interviews run like threads through her book, almost a chain link tying the whole theme together. Now, there's two surprising differences between the horizontal and the vertical structures. The vertically structured book is, generally speaking, quicker to write because you're focusing as a writer with intensity on one person's stories. You're blending those together, building one single chapter. And then you work on the next set of stories. And finally, you sequence the chapters together so the chapters themselves tell a useful story. There's an arc. You're also looking only for about 10 or 12 chapters, plus an introduction and a conclusion. So the upshot of choosing the vertical structure is simply speed. You can write a vertically structured book very quickly indeed, and with practice that can be about 12 weeks from blank page to a book on Amazon. A book with a horizontal structure is much tougher to sequence. To get the flow just right in a single chapter, and then to keep the themes working between the different chapters. But that's what makes it an absolute dream to read. That's what makes this The CEO's Journey so good. Now, you're probably looking at many more interviews here to give you the richness of a multi-story narrative. Matri O'Brien's New Leaders of Change, for instance, she interviewed 50 or more people and was able to use just the absolute best quotes, the best stories, the best insights from each person. Because you're not dependent on including every story from every individual. And for The CEO's Journey, Jacqueline Moore and I interviewed, I actually can't remember, let me have a quick look at the characters. 4 pages of characters, it's about 100 people. So it's likely going to take you a little bit more time to interview that many people, but it's going to create a much more sophisticated, much more beautiful read. It's perfect for memoirs or narrative non-fiction. Now, if you really want to get the greatest stories, you've got to interview people brilliantly. So watch this video right now to learn how to interview like the best TV show hosts in the world. I think my cake's finished.